Hey, in this video we'll be installing the SDL library, that is the Simple Direct Media Layer. And it is a C library, but we can use it in C++, and it gives us access to a whole bunch of things. It essentially acts as the platform that we're programming to. Instead of programming for Windows or Mac or Linux, we program to SDL, and it takes care of things like giving us access to video hardware and input and audio and all that. So we really want to make some video games, and well, what would they be without video? Games? So anyway, I'm at the SDL website. This is libsdl.org. And down in the corner here, there's a download section. Click on SDL 2.0, and this brings us to a download page with development libraries, which is what we're interested in. There are two options for Windows. There's a Visual C++ version that's going to use the compiler for Visual Studio, and there's a MinGW version, which is a GNU version for Windows that's it's based on the Linux compiler. So download the Visual C++ version, and it comes as a zip file, and you should take that zip file and copy it or move it into a new project. So I have this, let me get the view right. So I have a new Visual Studio project, an empty project for C++, and this is the solution if you find it in the file system, and SDL base is the project, so VCX proj file. If you don't have the file extension showing, you should go into your Explorer view settings and make sure that you show file extensions. And I've put the zip file right here next to my solution, and I've unzipped it. You can right click and you can go to extract all if you don't have a different unzipping program. And so if I look in here, it's nested one deep, so I'm going to move this out just so that it's easier to deal with. Delete the old one. Alright, so in that folder we have important things, the include folder, which has a whole bunch of header files. This is what SDL's interface looks like in each of these files. But the one we only really care about is sdl.h. That's what we'll be including. And then we've got a lib folder that has two subfolders, x64, x86. These are for different computer architectures, 64-bit or 32-bit. And default, Visual Studio has us compiling for 32-bit, which is fine. It's a little more compatible that way. So let's look at the x86 folder. And in here we have the DLL, Dynamic Link Library, which is going to be, it needs to be next to our executable for it to run. This contains the code that our program is going to call into. And then you have sdl2.lib and sdl2main.lib, and these are the library files that tell the linker in Visual Studio what kinds of things you can access. So we need to tell the linker about that in our project settings. Alright, so back up in the SDL folder, there's also a copying.txt. You should check that out, because this is the usage license for SDL. It's a very liberal one, so there are really never any problems with it. But make sure that you understand what you're agreeing to and what you're allowed to do with the software that you download. Alright, so in my Visual Studio project, I have a solution and a project and nothing else in it. I'm going to right click on my project and go to Properties so that I can hook up SDL. Alright, so in VC++ directories we have a bunch of options. There are way too many options in Visual Studio, but This is what we have to live with. We want to mess with the include directories and the library directories so that they point to the stuff that we've downloaded. Include directories. I'm gonna click into it, pull down menu and press edit. It brings me to this little box. And this is where I'll be adding another entry for the path that we have. But first, let me show you this part. In configuration, it says active debug platform Win32. Make sure that your platform is 32-bit. And for configuration, we can use just the debug configuration, and we can set up release build settings as well. But I'm going to go to all configurations. I'm just going to set it up so that it uses the same SDL version, whether you're building a debug testing build or a release build to give to other people. So all configurations, and then I'll go in and mess with the include directories. So you can click in here, or you can press new line and it'll give you a new entry here. And then you want to browse to your solution folder, find SDL2, and the include folder is what we want for our include directories. Select that folder, so it should look like that. And now, because I put this next to my solution, I can actually use a special macro in Visual Studio to get rid of this whole absolute file path here. If I move this project to a different computer, it wouldn't work because this is hard coding it to the C drive on this computer. So I'm going to go all the way up to my solution folder and replace it with a macro $ open parenthesis solution capital D dir. Alright, so that way it looks wherever my solution is, no matter what computer it's on, and then looks for this SDL2 directory. Press OK. And then in library directories, we're going to do a very similar thing, except we want lib x86. Select that folder, and then I'm going to replace the absolute file path with a relative path, solution dir. Okay. Alright. And now we've got it telling it where the files are. Now we have to tell it which files to use for the linker. Expand this by pressing the triangle. Expand the linker category. Go to input. And we want to add to our additional dependencies. So I'll edit this. Additional dependencies are going to be SDL2 main.lib and SDL2.lib. Okay. Press OK. Alright, so that's all set. I'm going to create a new, I'm going to add a new item. Just make a new source file for testing this out. And I'm just going to write down my boilerplate stuff. And I'm also going to include SDL.h so that I can check to make sure that it is actually finding the right file. Alright. So that should be good enough for testing it. And the last thing is that we need that DLL to be next to our executable. If you look at your project folder, here's my solution folder, here's my project folder. It's just source code. There's not any executable yet. So I'm going to try to build this. It's going to fail. Okay. So it failed. Let me see what it did. It created a debug directory. Great. In my project folder. It also created a debug folder in my solution directory. So if I open that debug folder, this is where the executable is going to go, and this is where we need to put the SDL DLL into our solution folder's debug. Alright, so I'll find that. If we go to the SDL folder, lib x86, copy that DLL, and put it into our debug folder. That's where it'll eventually end up. So the linking actually failed for a different reason. This is because Visual Studio is trying to auto-detect what kind of a program it is. So we need to tell it because that's failing. Right, if you're having this issue, right-click on your project, go to Properties, and then let's go down to Linker System. So Linker System has this entry called Subsystem, and this is telling it whether it's a Windows program or a console program, and we want it to be console. That way it looks for a main function instead of kind of silly win main is what a Windows program will look for. Press OK, and now we should be able to run it. Alright, looks good. So it opened up, closed right away, but that's what we wanted, no errors. Alright, that's it for setting up SDL. See you next time.